Welcome into episode 125 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm August Schrometer.
Apps that record what you're up to, pirates on the Enterprise, and 2FA has a day in court. For some reason, time to mark up another checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. Last week, TechCrunch ran a piece under the headline, "Many popular iPhone apps secretly record your screen without asking." TechCrunch said it had found several popular iPhone apps from hoteliers, travel sites, airlines, cell phone carriers, banks, and financiers that don't ask or make it clear, if at all, that they know exactly how you're using their apps. And when they say exactly, they mean exactly. Quoting the report, apps like Abercrombie & Fitch, Hotels.com, Singapore Airlines, and others use Glassbox, a customer experience analytics firm, one of a handful of companies that allows developers to embed session replay technology into their apps. These session replays let app developers record the screen and play them back to see how its users interacted with the app to figure out if something didn't work or if there was an error. Every tap, button push, and keyboard entry is recorded, effectively screenshotted, and sent back to the app developers. Now, maybe you trust Abercrombie & Fitch and Hotels.com. Trusting the app developer isn't the only issue. TechCrunch turned to a mobile expert who blogs under the name The App Analyst. They asked him to sample a few apps Glassbox listed as clients, and it didn't go great. Quoting the piece again, using Charles Proxy, a man-in-the-middle tool used to intercept the data sent from the app, the researcher could examine what data was going out of the device. The concern there is that if the data being sent isn't masked properly, little things like physical addresses, payment information, and so on could be plucked out of the ether. In fact, the app analyst showed that happening with the Air Canada app. It showed bad masking, not information being stolen. Now, there is another concern. Users don't know that this is happening. As TechCrunch points out, apps that are submitted to Apple's App Store must have a privacy policy, but none of the apps it reviewed make it clear in their policies that they record a user screen. Glassbox doesn't require any special permission from Apple or from the user, so there's no way a user would know. For his part, the app analyst says, "I think users should take an active role in how they share their data, and the first step to this is having companies be forthright in sharing how they collect the user's data and who they share it with." Now, I like the app analyst thinking there, though it strikes me as a bit optimistic, maybe. My thinking was that maybe Apple could lean on Glassbox or on the associated apps, and this actually has started to happen. The day after the initial TechCrunch report, Mac Rumors ran a piece that had Apple saying that such screenshotting was fine as long as users were clearly informed. In a statement to TechCrunch, Apple was quoted as saying, "Protecting user privacy is paramount in the Apple ecosystem. Our App Store review guidelines require that apps request explicit user consent and provide a clear visual indication when recording, logging, or otherwise making a record of user activity. We've notified these developers that are in violation of these strict privacy terms and guidelines and will take immediate action if necessary." So let's start way back at the beginning. Can you see a need for the type of information Glassbox is grabbing for developers and giving to developers?
You know, developers are always looking for insights into user behavior, especially if there's money involved. You always want to know how far in the process did the user make it before they dropped out. And this allows you as the developer to change the flow of the app, improve the user experience, and potentially increase your sales.
See, that's the thing. I get that. I mean, if there's a button that for some reason people aren't finding, or if there's another button that people are hitting too closely, if you're the guy who designed the app, you know exactly how to do it. You're not a real world case study.
Yep.
And so being able to record somebody else's screen is fantastic, except for the implications of being able to record somebody else's screen.
Exactly. As long as the sensitive data isn't being shared, then it's okay. But, in this case, obviously sensitive data was being sent.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to the Glassbox part of this in a second. You've developed a few apps. Did you ever use anything like this?
Analytics have been part of the developer's toolbox since the very early days of the App Store. I've used several different services, but I've never used anything like that Glassbox. I can see how it would be useful as you watch graphically people either do things that you expect or that you don't expect. As you mentioned, the developer is not the end user, and they have different expectations than what the user does. And to be able to watch the user do something or not do something is very beneficial in terms of trying to figure out how to change your app.
Now, for its part, Glassbox points out that it provides tools to mask sensitive data, though if I give you a hammer, it doesn't mean you're going to use it properly, and it doesn't mean you're going to use it at all. After this story hit a week or so ago, Glassbox issued a statement, part of which said, "We are strong supporters of user privacy and security. Glassbox provides its customers with the tools to mask every element of personal data. We firmly believe that our customers should have clear policies in place so that consumers are aware that their data is being recorded, just as contact centers inform users that their calls are being recorded." But you and I both read a piece, I sent it to you, about Air Canada, that had, Air Canada either not using the masking tools properly or the screenshotting being so quick that the sensitive info was still showing up in the screenshots that were being stored.
Sure. And I don't see Glassbox doing anything nefarious here. They're just being called out as the bad guy. They do what it says on the tin. But if a developer implements things improperly, that's when things go wrong. And I suspect this will force Glassbox to improve its SDK to make this sort of data exposure much less likely. I took a look at the Glassbox site. They segregate all of the data. Every customer gets its own server, so the data can't be shared. What worries me is that sometime down the road, some executive at Glassbox or a company like Glassbox will sit there and go, boy, if we could analyze all this data at once, what could we do with it? And that's where things get a little gray.
Yeah. The Glassbox statement also went on to say no data collected by Glassbox customers is shared with third parties nor enriched through other external sources, which I guess is the thing that you were just saying. You kind of worry about that down the road.
Right.
I got to say, though, I'd be curious how they can actually guarantee this. I mean, it really all comes down to, what Air Canada or Abercrombie or other companies say in their privacy statements, doesn't it?
Which we all read thoroughly, right?
Yeah. Okay. See, that brings us to the next point, Apple's answer. And I want to repeat part of that. Our App Store review guidelines require that apps request explicit user consent and provide a clear visual indication when recording, logging, or otherwise making a record of user activity. After years of either pages and pages of legalese that's hard to understand even if you try to, or, two-line updates that say this will make things better, which is actually only one line, I guess the questions that I have are, first of all, can we trust apps, can we trust apps to actually tell us what information is being stored or recorded or kept? And the second question, have we trained people out of bothering with update info and privacy policies? But start with the first one. I mean, can we trust the apps to actually tell us, hey, here, by the way, this is the information I'm taking?
Heck no. Especially if it's Facebook, my favorite punching boy. Yeah. But to me, this seems very much like all the analytics and ad network companies that were used in the early days of the App Store. Apple recognized that these companies were sharing data across apps, and they changed the OS so that they couldn't do that anymore. Apple takes PR very seriously, and I'm sure they've already had multiple meetings about what changes to make in the next version of the OS or in the app review tools to address this.
And the other question is, okay, so Apple says, listen, you have to tell people, and the developers say, okay, we'll get 80 words where 10 would suffice. I mean, have we trained people out of actually paying attention to privacy policies or update notes?
There are privacy policies?
Apparently. I don't know. I assume, honestly, that Facebook actually has a privacy policy. I know it doesn't come through in the Facebook app when you update it. I wouldn't know where to actually find it. And even if I did, I would imagine that the language in it would be so mind-boggling or arcane or a combination of the two that I would never understand what kind of information I was actually giving to whom.
Right. But if you read the new Apple rules or the old Apple rules, depending on what you want to call them, they're very explicit in that the permission that they get from the user has to explicitly state that they're going to be recorded and what the information is being used for. And I think Apple's changed the rules and makes for a horrible user experience. And I think that's on purpose. Imagine if you launched an app for the very first time and it says, hey, we're recording your every move. Please tap OK to approve this. I think the uninstall rate for that app would skyrocket. So I think this is Apple targeting apps that use companies like Glassbox by using simple developer rules.
None of this, by the way, is meant to make Glassbox the villain or the only villain, depending on whether or not you see that firm as villainous. Mac Rumors does say there are many other analytics companies that have similar practices like AppC and UXCam, so there are undoubtedly many more apps that are using these secret screen recording features without customer knowledge. Yeah, you kind of don't want to say secret. I mean, screen recording features. That are using these screen recording features without customer knowledge. Now, at least one developer has already been told to remove the code that recorded app activities. From an email to that developer, Apple said, your app uses analytics software to collect and send user or device data to a third party without the user's consent. Apps must request explicit user consent and provide a clear visual indication when recording, logging, or otherwise making a record of user activity. Apple is serious about getting rid of this code and gave the developer in question less than a day to remove it and resubmit the app before it would be pulled from the App Store. So says the article from Mac Rumors. So here is kind of a continuation of the Facebook and Google stories from a couple of weeks back. It came out then that both of those companies were using Apple's Enterprise Certificate program to sidestep the App Store and the rules that govern App Store apps. They were then walking people through the steps necessary to sideload apps, which Facebook and Google used to gather untold amounts of potentially sensitive information on the people using the applications. Well, same goes for porn and gambling. Not that it's collecting information, although not that it's not either. The folks at TechCrunch say an investigation of theirs has uncovered a dozen hardcore pornography apps and a dozen real money gambling apps that escaped Apple's oversight. The developers passed Apple's weak enterprise certificate screening process, or piggybacked on a legitimate approval, allowing them to sidestep the App Store and Cupertino's traditional safeguards designed to keep iOS family-friendly. Without proper oversight, they were able to operate these vice apps and blatantly flaunt Apple's content policies. Yikes! It feels like I'm hearing a bit of disdain here. I'm hearing indignation or something, and maybe other people will as well as I read further, which I will do now. The problem starts with Apple's lax standards for accepting businesses to the enterprise program, continues TechCrunch. The program is for companies to distribute apps only to their employees, and its policy explicitly states you may not use, distribute, or otherwise make your internal use applications available to your customers. Yet Apple doesn't adequately enforce these policies. Developers simply have to fill out an online form and pay $299 to Apple. The form merely asks developers to pledge they're building an enterprise certificate app for internal employee-only use, that they have the legal authority to register the business, provide a DUNS business ID number, and have an up-to-date Mac. After setting up an Apple ID and agreeing to the terms of service, businesses wait 1 to 4 weeks for a phone call from Apple asking them to reconfirm they'll only distribute apps internally and are authorized to represent their business. With just a few lies on the phone and web, plus some Googleable public information, sketchy developers can get approved for an Apple Enterprise Certificate. That sounds really easy. Is it actually that easy?
The last time a company I worked for applied for an enterprise developer account, there were a number of hoops we had to jump through, forms, phone calls, etc. But as this piece pointed out, with a few well-planned deceptions, it's really easy to go around those hoops with no problem.
Now, you've been around for the start of a startup or two. What does this whole thing look like to you?
I honestly think this is one of those things Apple didn't see coming. You can't plan for every contingency, but you know they're planning for it now.
It's weird to me. It's weird to me that like you can do this for less than like the third of the cost of an iPhone XS. I mean, it's weird that you can. I don't quite understand why that's so inexpensive. I mean, if this whole thing is I'm Deloitte, right? Or I'm startup drive writer 1, 2, 3, whatever. I'm trying to get business from people who have gone out and spent somewhere between $750 and $1,000 on a phone, maybe more or maybe less if they're walking around with an older phone. But then to be part of the enterprise thing, it costs me, I mean, much less than a month's rent. I mean, does it cost too little? I mean, I guess that's what I'm asking. I mean, is the bar too low?
I hear what you're saying, but I don't think Apple ever wanted the developer program, enterprise or otherwise, to be a cost barrier to entry. Mm-hmm. They just wanted to make sure the developer was serious about their commitment to the app and the App Store.
Here's the problem that I'm having, and it's personal, okay? When I come across stories like this, and I find myself sort of on Apple's side, and I know it sounded like I was saying, oh, Apple's making this far too easy, but I mean, that was the one thing about this that I'm like, I wonder if Apple is actually trying hard enough. I'm sometimes worried that I'm becoming an Apple apologist, but this feels like almost like a hit piece in a way from TechCrunch, right? I mean, first of all, TechCrunch seems to want to have it both ways, saying at one point, this situation shows further evidence that Apple has been neglecting its responsibility to police the enterprise certificate program, leading to its exploitation to circumvent App Store rules in forbidden categories. The same piece goes on to say, in an apparent effort to step up policy enforcement in the wake of TechCrunch's investigation into Facebook and Google's enterprise certificate violations, Apple appears to have disabled some of these apps in the past few days, but many remain operational. So Apple's not doing anything, but they are, but they didn't, but they are, but they're not finished yet.
Yeah, sometimes I worry. I'm an apologist too, but I try and be objective, and I definitely think this is a clickbait hit piece. That said, sometimes you need a clickbait hit piece to make Apple pay attention. I feel like this is similar to what I said in the previous story. This is a pretty big black eye for Apple. And I'm sure Phil Schiller has been doing a lot of yelling and screaming about this to try and find a solution. I mean, he wants to protect users as well as Apple. And the last thing Apple wants is to be associated with porn and illegal gambling.
You know, this is what's weird to me. And I think if I draw it out, it's sort of like if I find out that my neighbor was, I don't know, cooking meth, right? Like in their basement or in their bathroom. I don't know where you cook meth. I don't even know my neighbor. But I mean, if you found that out and you said, well, gosh, I guess we should have had a camera in his house to look in everybody's house. Maybe we should have them in everybody's houses, right? I mean, look, some people are out there doing bad things. Some people will go out there and find ways to do bad things. Some people will try to circumvent the rules. But Apple wasn't looking into what Facebook was doing with its enterprise developer thing.
Right.
Apple wasn't looking into what Google was doing with its enterprise developer thing. I said on the episode a couple weeks ago when I had when Nicholas Tonchek was here, I liked the fact that Apple didn't know what Facebook was doing, because that meant that Apple was honoring what it had said as far as like, yeah, we're not going to look into your business. I mean, same as it does for you, August Trompeter, personal citizen. And for me, Ken Ray, and everybody else as well. TechCrunch does go on to say Apple refused to explain how these apps slipped into the Enterprise Certificate app program. It declined to say if it does any follow-up compliance audits on developers in the program or if it plans to change admission process. An Apple spokesperson did provide this statement, though, indicating it will work to shut these apps down and potentially ban the developers from building iOS products entirely. Developers that abuse our enterprise certificates are in violation of the Apple Developer Enterprise Program Agreement and will have their certificates terminated, and if appropriate, they will be removed from our developer program completely, said the statement. We are continuously evaluating the cases of misuse and are prepared to take immediate action. it's like I said a minute ago, I kind of held Apple blameless in the Facebook and Google situations. Google and Facebook knew that they were violating Apple's rules and went ahead and did it anyway. Now, I don't mean people who sell porn any offense, but I think we expect a bit more decorum from publicly traded companies, to whom we turn to share pictures of our kids or our grandparents, or, we go online to find out what the word didactic means, right? I mean, we expect more from publicly traded companies than we do from porn sites or illegal gambling operations. Now, all that stuff about, auditing or checking back in, that does raise an interesting point from TechCrunch. Is there something more that you think Apple could do?
Well, first of all, it's easy for Apple to say that a developer will be permanently removed if they violate this stuff. But if they don't change the application process, then that developer could simply re-up as a different company and do it all over again. So that's the first thing that I think Apple could do, is change the process. In addition to that, I can say that from experience, once you've got an enterprise developer account from Apple, unless you get caught doing bad things, they don't audit or review you or your enterprise apps at all. So that would be a great place to start, and it's something I think they will do.
Can I stop you right there really quickly, though?
Sure.
How do they how do they audit your enterprise apps? Because, that's the whole point of the enterprise developer program, right? The fact that I can, Facebook calls them dog food apps, right? I can be working on something. I don't have to submit it to Apple, which means I can move with a certain amount of alacrity. If there's a problem with an internal app that I'm working on, I can fix that internal app and I can send it out, to all the people on my team. That's the whole point. Apple auditing my enterprise apps basically means I don't have an enterprise developer account at all.
But at the very least, they could audit the developer account from time to time to make sure that, everything is up and up there.
Something you have, something you know, and something we could all do without. We'll hit a questionable lawsuit in just a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. A lot of people switch to the Mac because Macs are immune to malware. Except, as you know, no they aren't. Maybe you've skated by for years hoping to not get infected or, not get hit with some kind of malware, but here's the thing. The ice is getting thin. Don't risk it. Go safely with MacScan 3 by SecureMac. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by SecureMac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for well over a decade. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Protect your digital life. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by SecureMac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. From the Getting It Without Really Getting It file, a story from Apple Insider. Apple is being sued because two-factor authentication on an iPhone or Mac takes too much time. A class action suit has been filed that accuses Apple's two-factor authentication of being too disruptive to users, taking too much time out of a user's day when it is needed, and abusive since it can't be rolled back to a less safe login method after 14 days. The suit, filed in California, alleges that Apple doesn't get user consent to enable two-factor authentication. Furthermore, once enabled, two-factor authentication imposes an extraneous logging in procedure that requires a user to both remember a password and have access to a trusted device or trusted phone number when the device is enabled. Something you have and something you know, that's two factors, right?
Absolutely. And the third possibility is something you are, such as your face, a retina scan, or a fingerprint scan.
Hey, I'm more than just my pretty face, mister.
Yes, you are. Most people have actually used two-factor authentication, even if they didn't know it. Your debit card, for example, is something you have, and the PIN is something you know. So every time you use the ATM, you're using two-factor auth.
I kind of wish this guy would sue for that. I just want to be able to walk up and yell, "Give me $20 to the ATM." To be clear, two-factor authentication can be a pain in the backside, but it's supposed to be. I mean, it's not supposed to be a pain, but it is meant to be not as easy as, say, typing 1, 2, 3, 4 to log into your banking site.
Yeah, I feel like this guy is saying sticking the key in the ignition and turning it takes too long. So he wants to leave his car doors unlocked and the engine running while he goes to buy groceries. Good luck with that.
Yeah. I think we know why, and I think we've talked before why, but please remind us again why two-factor authentication is so important.
Sure. It's really simple. It protects you from brute force attacks and social engineering, which would give them your login and password.
Them being bad guys.
Bad guys, yeah. If a hacker somehow gains both of these, which is something they won't have the other half of 2FA, something you have or something you are. In other words, let's say you reuse the same login and password across sites. Well, shame on you first. But if one of those sites is compromised, the hacker now knows your login and password for many of the sites you use. With two-factor, even if they have the login and password, they still won't have your two-factor one-time PIN code, which is something that you have, in addition to something that you know. So you've got an additional layer of protection that makes it so much harder for a hacker to get your personal data.
See, that's an excellent summation. I thank you very much. This piece goes on to say filing paperwork associated with the suit also alleges that harm is being done and potential class members have been and continue to suffer harm, including economic losses based on a waste of personal time for an extended login process that has become a multiple-step process. The filer alleges that a software update enabled two-factor authentication on or around September 2015. However, neither macOS El Capitan or iOS 9 released in the time frame put forth by the filer mandated two-factor authentication, nor implemented it without an explicit and multiple-step opt-in procedure requiring the user to consent. The piece has the suit saying when two-factor authentication is demanded, the process as follows takes between 2 and 5 minutes. For Apple Insider, it took 22 seconds. And the suit is demanding injunctive relief, fines, and penalties assessed on Apple in accordance with the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and is seeking all funds, revenues, and benefits that Apple has unjustly received from the action. I'm not sure how he thinks Apple is making money off of two-factor authentication, but okay. The filer is also asserting that Apple is violating California's Invasion of Privacy Act, but how that applies also isn't immediately clear, according to Apple Insider. And I can't help wondering if this guy would settle for $50 and a sidekick, or maybe a Nokia 3310. A good candy bar phone really may be the way for him to go.
I think we should just put him in a corner for a timeout and take away his attorney.
Here's the thing. So we're making light of this lawsuit, and I think we should make light of this lawsuit. I honestly worry about this individual. As I was writing this story, I was like, I'm hoping somebody reads this and says, we might want to get him help. And I'm not making fun because this is, if it takes you between 2 and 5 minutes, look, it's,
See, I think it's just the opposite. I think anyone who reads about this guy is going to go, wow, like he probably leaves the front door to his house open, so let's go rob him.
Either that or thinking, wow, what stupid lawsuit might I be able to make money from?
Oh, God, I hope not.
Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is SecureMac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for this show, for the last show, for any shows coming up. I know we did one on two-factor authentication a long time ago. SecureMac.com/checklist will be the place to find that. You'll find the notes for it, and you'll be able to listen to that old show right there as well. If you have a question you would like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. and we'll talk to you next week.